Grief is real, big, better shared. The podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear.
I'm Diane Brockmeyer, the CEO of Mid-America Transplant, and we are honored to sponsor this episode of Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared. At Mid-America Transplant, we have the privilege of working with families across southern Missouri and northeast Arkansas who choose to donate their loved ones' organs or tissues. While donation often brings families comfort, they are still heartbroken by their loss. We are proud to work with the Center for Good Grief and appreciate everything they are doing in the region to help bring healing to people who are coping with loss. Grief support is especially meaningful to me, as it was a tremendous help to my daughter, who lost her dad when she was 7 years old. 20 years later, she still recalls the positive, safe feelings she had with her grief support group. They understood her. Mid-America Transplant is inspired by life and by the donor families who give transplant patients a second chance. For more information about becoming a donor, visit sayyesgivelife.org.
Hello, welcome to Grief is Real, Big, Better Shared, the podcast everyone needs to hear, but nobody wants to hear. I'm Angela Hamblin-Kelly, and I'm the administrator of the Baptist Centers for Good Grief. Before we get started today, I want to give you a little bit of history on our program and who we are. Our grief program started in 1999. So for 24-ish years, we've been providing grief camps, grief groups, and individual grief counseling for children, teens, and adults. We are doing this podcast because our clients have been asking for it as a platform for support. That's really the foundation of most of our services, our community asking for more. We are also so grateful to our community donors who have generously supported us over the years, as all of our services are free of charge. So, over these 24 years, we have grown from a children's grief camp to a program with 3 grief centers that provide grief support to Tennessee, Mississippi, Arkansas, and Southeast Missouri. We started this podcast because grief is the most universal experience there is. Again, this is the podcast everyone needs to hear because grief involves pain and vulnerability, which is also why this is the podcast nobody wants to hear. So I sit here today with 24 plus years experience as a grief counselor, but I'm also a griever. I've lost my dad, my brother, my nephew, along with several other beloved family members over an 8-year period. So in our podcast, we hope to honestly look at grief and discuss the heart and head tug of war from an evidence-based grief counseling perspective, but also the very real life perspective too. Our plan for our episodes is to be candid and honest discussions with real grievers. And today we're here with a former colleague, I guess returned colleague now, and friend Molly. And Molly, so glad you're here today. And let's just start. Maybe you introduce yourself and maybe a little bit about what brought you to the Baptist Centers for Good Grief.
Okay. My name is Molly Ebach, and like you said, we're former colleagues. I used to work at Baptist. I knew a lot about the services offered at Baptist. Never thought I would personally need them, as no one does. And my second child was stillborn at 35 weeks due to a cord accident, and I found myself needing grief services and grief counseling, and I knew the first place to call from working with you and knew about the wonderful things that Baptist does for people in grieving mode. So I reached out and started grief counseling and really turned things around for me. And so I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm glad you asked me.
Absolutely. Having known you and just your social media presence and all that you've done to memorialize Hayes, it just really made sense to ask you to come and be here and to share with other moms and dads who may be fresh in the loss of a miscarriage or stillbirth, and helping them see their grief as real, That's a really big part of our work, is that grief is very real. And so tell us about Hayes, and expecting Hayes to join your family. As you mentioned, your second child. So you had a daughter.
Yes, I had a daughter named Sloan, and they were due exactly 2 years apart. And that was exciting. And the thought of it was also a little nerve-wracking and chaotic, but we were very excited. And all of a sudden, one day, I did not feel him moving, and went to the hospital and confirmed that he had passed. And really, I mean, the shock, I can still hear, the goings on in that room, and the phone call to my parents and the reactions. I can still hear that, 12 years later. And at first, you, in a shocking loss, I feel like you just, at first it seems like, okay, this is going to be fine. We're going to get through this. We're going to move on. And then I think it was 6 weeks had passed, and I realized that the shock started to wear off. And that's when I called, because I thought, I can't do this by myself. My daughter started school again. And once she started school and he was supposed to be here and the house was quiet, I knew I couldn't just sit there with my thoughts. Right. So I think I started, it's kind of a little fuzzy.
Sure.
I think I started counseling at 6 weeks, and Paige was my counselor at the time, and she was, she just let me, like you said, she validated that my grief was real. In the beginning, I think everybody thought, this is, you just move on.
Right.
And this is just, you just have another baby and then you just move on. And that just wasn't sitting well with me. And it just didn't feel right. I felt like I am just beyond devastated and at a complete loss of how to move forward. And so I felt that validation with counseling, and that it kind of made me able to stick up for myself a little bit with family members who were doubting what I should and shouldn't be feeling. And this was my first experience with grief. I'd lost grandparents when I was very young, but my maternal grandparents at the time were still alive. I was blessed to have the rest of my family alive. So I had no experience with grief.
Right.
And it was very, I 100% credit where I am today with being allowed to grieve and getting it out, if you will. Like, there was no other way around it, only through it. And so anyway, I started with the counseling, and Paige encouraged me to maybe journal. And I tried that, and it just, the exercise of writing was just, and I'm a writer by trade, but the physical writing was exhausting to me. And I found a website called Faces of Loss. I don't know if it's still going. I have some friends who tried to get it going again. It may still be. And it connected me to different blogs of people who experienced a very similar loss. And you could look up type of loss, how long ago it was. You could look up cause, and it would post links to all these blogs. And so I started reading these blogs, and I could hear my voice in these blogs. So I took my journaling online and I started blogging. Right. And of course I sent my blog out to my friends and family and social media, and that was not well received.
Right.
Because my family didn't necessarily think it was something that should be done publicly.
Sure.
But I had to communicate how I was feeling to the people around me.
Right.
Because nobody wanted to listen to me talk. You know, they didn't want to listen when I would say, this is what I need.
Right.
But they were reading my blog. And whether they were reading it because they were curious or because they wanted to help me or because they, whatever, they were reading it.
They were reading it.
And so that was the initial reason for my blog, was to take Paige's advice and journal in a less like what felt cumbersome to me.
Sure.
And so then my blog kind of turned into connecting more with these other baby loss moms. And so I'd comment on their blog, and then they would come and read my blog and comment on my blog. And I formed an unbelievable bond with these people online, and just by happenstance.
Right.
Literally, it was nothing planned. That's not what I set out to do.
Sure.
But between the blog and grief counseling, I am here today because of it. I fully believe that.
And that's truly why I wanted you to be here and have this conversation with me, because in the grief clinical world, we call this disenfranchised grief. Like, it has a name, and it's grief that is not socially recognized or accepted. And I appreciate your honesty. And, you know, we talk about this all the time with all grieving people, is that families grieve individually and differently. But what we know sometimes, especially with a stillborn, is people will give you those messages of, well, you can have another baby, or, you know, even messages like, well, you didn't even really have time with him. So, you know, I'm not sure, what are you grieving? And they're not getting the grief of what was as mom who felt that baby, but grief of the future that doesn't get to exist. And so that disenfranchised grief, it's real and it's out there every day. People are walking around with this grief that is not recognized. So that's really why I wanted you here. And thank you for just jumping in and diving into that. And you were talking about those first few days and weeks and how even 12 years later, it's a blur.
It is a blur. And I hate that because I feel like I lost a lot. I not only lost my son and the joy, but I also lost that time with my daughter. I have a really hard time looking at pictures of her at that age because I don't remember it.
Sure.
And I feel like I did not have another daughter. Thankfully, I went on to have 2 more boys, and I'll tell you about them and that. But I never had another daughter. And so I've had a really hard time with letting go of her things and her clothes because I don't necessarily remember that time. So that was just kind of a secondary loss that I didn't realize right away. But it's definitely one that hits me more now that she's 14. Right. And I'm like, oh gosh. So, you know, it's just another compound to the original loss.
And you jumped in there to those secondary losses. I think that's something too that we're not aware of until we are grieving. You know, we think that it's really mainly about this person we could see, touch, and feel, but there are these other losses. So even just the loss of memories or creating memories with your daughter because you were in need of care yourself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I do remember when I would drop her off at school and I would have a counseling day and I would, you know, gear up and then I would just, you know, spend the rest of my day crying and then I'd go pick her up from school, you know, and that's how it was for a while, for a really long time. But I think one of my favorite things to say now, and I didn't realize I was doing it at the time, was grieve out loud. And I feel like I grieved out loud. I feel like, and I had people tell me, you're not grieving gracefully. You're not handling this right. You shouldn't be. And I've lost friends. I wouldn't say I've lost family members, but I remember things that family members have said, and I wish I could let go of those things. But, you know, you can't. We've moved on. We're all in a good place, but it's tough, you know. It's tough to always, you know, those random thoughts come back.
Yeah. I saw a great quote yesterday, and I'm probably going to mess it up a little bit, but it's, if my grief makes you feel uncomfortable, imagine how I'm feeling right now.
I saw that post. And I love that because that is so true.
So true.
So true. If it makes you uncomfortable. And I really, at first, and Paige told me this, and I'll never forget it. She said, because I had a struggle. I ran into someone at a toy store and they said, oh, so-and-so with her newborn is in the car. Come see her. And I thought, I can't. And I did not mention why I could not go out there. And I said, it would just make them uncomfortable. And Paige said, so you had to deal with that for the rest of the week, basically, thinking about why she's wondering why you didn't go out there. So it made you so uncomfortable because you didn't want to make them uncomfortable. And I realized that, like, yeah, I really should put myself first sometimes and just stick up for myself, basically, in these situations. And so they have to have a little, 10-minute, oh, that was weird, or whatever, due to our encounter. And instead, I'm suffering for days because of it,
Right. And so grieving out loud, expressing that grief. But I think a lot of grievers, and I think a lot of moms in this situation would say they will take it on instead of making someone else feel uncomfortable. So how did you navigate, being around maybe people who are pregnant or with their new babies? I mean, from that situation, did you start saying it out loud more, or?
I definitely did. So another compound to my loss was my sister was pregnant at the same time, and our babies were due 2 weeks apart. Right. And so since Hayes was early, they would have been 6 weeks apart. And I did not meet my niece for 9 months because I literally could not. So I missed Christmas with my family for the first time ever. And they were all understanding in the beginning.
Okay.
And then it got to a point, they're like, okay, this is ridiculous. And, basically forced it on me. And I'm glad that I took the step when I did, but it was tough. Yeah. And I don't know. It's just not something I could deal with. And I felt like I was sticking up for myself by saying, these are my boundaries right now. And I have a daughter to raise, and I cannot send myself into a spiral. Right. And, I don't know. It was tough. But, 9 months after she was born, I was able to finally to meet her. And, the buildup is always, I think, worse than the interaction. And that was definitely the case. And I was fine with her after that. Being around babies, it doesn't still bother me. Except I feel like I'm checked out a little bit. Okay. Like maybe, like in the beginning, I could not be around babies. If someone was pregnant, I would just pretend like they weren't. Right. I could not deal with it. Right. And now I deal with it in a different way. Like I'm just like not interested. And I don't know if that's a defense mechanism or what.
I think it is. Yeah.
Because who doesn't love a baby? Right. But I'm indifferent, I guess.
Exactly. Right.
So that's not fun.
I had a mom tell me once that she was just cautious, and it was real interesting that was the word she used. She said, I think cautious for myself, maybe cautious for them, but just cautious felt good to her. Because the way she described it is that it felt like it was putting a boundary there, just being cautious, like you're cute and I like you, but stay right there. Right. We're just going to I'm just feeling a little cautious.
Yes. Yeah. I definitely think I went through that. And now it's like, I'm fine. I don't even feel the need to be cautious. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just
indifferent.
Yes. Yeah. Indifferent.
So you've shared about your family, and we know that grief touches families and couples and children. Yes. How did the grief present itself within your family? And then I'm interested here 12 years later, how do you still see that grief show up?
Well, there was a lot of tension in the beginning with my extended family. Thankfully, Jason, my husband, and I were on the same page. Now, we grieve differently, but he did not feel like he needed to damper my voice at all, unlike other family members, which was good. Now, we went through our ups and downs. I felt like it was a 3-week thing. Like everything would be great for 3 weeks, and then maybe I would hit a low or he would hit a low. And with our differences in grieving, it was like a little bit of a roller coaster. But we were pretty solid. We never, thankfully, had any issues. And a lot of people, if you're grieving differently, do. But I had seen him grieve the loss of his mother privately and quietly. And so I knew that's how he was going to handle this.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that helped me because I knew that he was still grieving.
Right.
He was just doing it in his own way. And of course, I was able to talk that through with Paige, and she was able to reassure me. So we, although on different pages, we were on the same page.
But I hear respect. I hear respect for
Yes.
each other. And I think that's so important with couples is because I hear that all the time. Well, he's not grieving like me, or she's,
Right.
but to be able to have that respect.
Yes.
You're not doing it like me. I really don't get it, but I understand that's you.
And he also read my blog, and he read my thoughts, and he knew how to handle me.
Good.
And he respected that. And he also respected the fact, like, when I would do things that would make other people uncomfortable, like a Christmas card, the way I would include Hayes in our Christmas card, because it was really important for me from the beginning to keep him a part of our family.
Yes.
A visible part of our family, because I always wanted my daughter to recognize she has a brother in heaven. I always wanted people to know. At the time I had 2 children, or I had 2 babies. And so I was pretty, he was pretty plastered on our Christmas cards, and he still is included in one way or another. I think we've started signing it with Hayes, love the Ebach family, and we list our names, and then with Hayes in our hearts. And a lot of people maybe they'll get our Christmas card that didn't know somebody, my neighbor at the time across the street, she called, "Oh, are you pregnant?" And then I explained. But that's okay, and I'm comfortable with that now. I'm more comfortable including him in things like that than not including him. So that is a very important thing for me, is just including him in things. And then, so I've gone on to have 2 more boys, I said, and they knew about Hayes, from the beginning. And so we celebrate his birthday. We have a tree in his memory, and we go there. We kind of had to find, like, our tradition is to go there and have a little dessert picnic. It started out more elaborate than it is today, but it's, my kids are all in school now. His birthday is the first week of school, or second week of school. So it's less elaborate, but it's still important to me.
Right.
And it's important to them. And this year, I thought, I wonder if I'm forcing this on everybody. I wonder if, like, my 7-year-old wants to do this.
Right.
And so I didn't mention it before school, because my 10-year-old is very heartfelt. He's very, he'll randomly mention Hayes and say, "I really wish my older brother was here." And he's very just a tender-hearted kid. And so I didn't mention it before school that day, because I didn't want to put that in his head for the day. But when I picked them up, I said, "Do y'all know what today is?" And I mentioned it was Hayes' birthday. And Taylor, my youngest one, said, "Oh, wow, we get to go to his tree." And I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm not forcing this on them, So that was awesome.
Good.
And another thing I struggled with this year is what to post on social media, because I don't know at what point do I just keep this as a family thing. I know people judge some of these posts, which doesn't make me feel. I got off Facebook after he died. I think it was, I don't know how long I stayed on. I stayed on for a little bit, and then it would hurt so bad to see people like posts of my other kids and not like a post about Hayes. That was the worst.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm out of here. And I tried once or twice to get back on, and it's not the platform for me. But my blogging friends started on Instagram, and I joined them there, and that's how Instagram started for me. And now it's a family thing.
Right.
But I do struggle with, what do I post? Do I just post on his birthday? Do I post when And so this year I didn't post anything. And several people had texted me and said, why haven't you posted it? And I thought, I don't know. I'm feeling weird about it right now. What? And then I ended up posting at the end of the day, because I just felt like it's going to make me feel worse to not. If I'm struggling with this, then it's probably means I want to post this, and I'm just not doing it for other people. And I did post, and it felt good to do it at the end of the day this year, because I thought a little bit of, maybe I wouldn't be wondering if I'm being judged throughout this day. I don't need that on this day. You know,
Right.
If they want to judge me, they can judge me later, but I don't need to think about who's judging me.
Right.
I think that's what I nailed it down to, the reason for that feeling.
You bring up a really good point. A lot of people will talk about social media and like, I want to post, I want to share this picture, but are people will give people the message, well, it's been 10 years, you're still posting a picture.
Exactly.
And, you know, or just those judgments, or like you said, liking all the other posts, but not liking this one.
Right.
Or people, you know, your post, I hear this a lot, your post made me sad.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yes.
Yeah.
So mine, I feel like are more birthday instead of, I'm not just generally posting about my grief as much anymore, pretty much because I don't have to and I don't feel the need to. In the beginning, I had to, and I needed that. But I'm in a really good place now, and it's not because time has passed and I've not. And we have moved forward. We haven't moved on. We've moved forward. But I feel like I just carry that grief now. And it's just a part of me. And it doesn't, what's the word I'm looking for? It doesn't completely destroy me. You know, it's just with me.
Right. It's with you.
Yes.
It's part of you. Right. And that's such I think, an important message for grievers to know is that your grief is a part of you. It doesn't define all of you, but it also doesn't leave you. There's not an ending point. You carry it with you.
Absolutely.
It just becomes a part of almost like just your DNA. Right?
Absolutely. That is exactly it. Yeah. And it's hard to describe because it's not something that sends me to the floor, you know, like it used to. But I carry it. And that's okay.
Yeah.
You know?
So you bring up a point that sometimes grievers will ask about is like, how is it possible to ever feel joy again?
Well, time helps, processing helps, coming to terms with the loss helps, finding ways to incorporate your loved one in your life moving forward helps. And everybody thought, just have another baby. Just have another baby and you'll be fine. Well, I waited. I was convinced there was a reason for this court accident. It just didn't make sense. And I know court accidents can happen at random. But I was carrying Hayes I felt like a weird position. He had not moved positions in a really long time. His head was right under my heart. And I brought it up to my doctor and, baby should stay that, But something about that just did not sit well with me after I lost him. So he passed in my sleep and I was sleeping on the side that they tell you to sleep on for blood flow and all that while you're pregnant. And you start piecing things together after the loss and things you start thinking about, okay, this puzzle piece fits here. And so I realized, I was sleeping on the side where I felt he was on all the time. And after doctor, we found scar tissue in my uterus that had formed a septum that had kept him on one side.
Right.
And the cord got underneath him while I was asleep on that side, and that was the cause. And so I had a surgery to remove that scar tissue, and then I got pregnant again. And I thought, if I had listened and I had just gotten pregnant again, like everybody told me, maybe I would have had another loss, or maybe I wouldn't have gotten pregnant. I don't know.
Right.
But so Hayes and my son Kellen ended up being 20 months apart. So I got pregnant a full year after Hayes passed. And that was hard. Yeah. That was hard to wait. And, because I had a lot of friends that had gotten pregnant again pretty quickly. And so, I had to heal from the surgery and all that. So, but it ended up, I think, being a blessing that I had that full year of grieving time, of just going to counseling and blogging. And I felt in the right place when I got pregnant. And I knew it was not going to cure all, but at the same time, I was hopeful.
Yeah.
And then when I had Kellen, I experienced just a different kind of, we were overjoyed when he arrived safely, but I was paralyzed with fear. Yeah. And I would wake up in the middle of the night, just drenched in sweat, find myself running down the hall to make sure he's okay. Mm-hmm. And so for the first, I would say 6 months, I didn't really, I enjoyed him immensely, but at the same time, not in a normal way, because I was so terrified something was going to happen to him, because I had made all these friends who had babies that died of SIDS and other ways. And I just thought, oh, well, this has happened to me once. Right. This can happen again. Right. And it was rough.
It's that reality of grief too, especially like you said, this has happened to me. And then your eyes are sort of opened to all these other things, all these other possibilities. Not that you didn't know, but you have the shoes now.
The lightning has struck.
Yes.
And I believe it can strike again,
Yes.
So that was tough. Yeah. And that was not something I expected. Right. Thankfully, I was still in grief counseling. I wasn't letting go.
That's right.
And I needed it still. I needed it to get through that time. And
we see that certainly with moms. And I was going to ask you, just even when you were pregnant with Kellen, just, how did you process the grief just in those months of pregnancy?
I don't remember, honestly. I don't remember.
I actually think that's a normal response. Yeah, you were just in survival mode, I would
literally
bet.
In survival mode, literally waiting for something to go wrong. And unfortunately, we did not have a smooth pregnancy. I had I had placenta previa. And so I was on bed rest. There was bleeding. There was hospital bed rest. And all because of the scar tissue and, so it was hard. It was hard. Did not think we were going to make it, but here we are.
Here you are. Yeah. Yeah. Several moms that I know right now that we see at the center, that's the place they're in is, maybe being told by their doctor that it's okay to start thinking about having a baby, but then being kind of paralyzed with the fear of pregnancy or fear of when the baby's here, because now I know all these other things too, because of just being more aware of grief.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned this briefly just a minute ago, but it's really one thing I wanted us to talk about. Grief is just ignored so much. People think it's such a taboo subject. I talked about the disenfranchised grief, but I think you have done a beautiful job memorializing Hayes and teaching his siblings about him. His siblings know him, and they, because of you and Jason, you all have done that. I think it'd be great if you could talk a little bit in depth about how you actually have done that. Like you mentioned the Christmas card, but what does that mean that Hayes is in your Christmas card, or the other things that you do throughout the year to remember him?
It has changed so much over the years, I will say. It is evolved. It's, it started with, initially I needed everyone I saw to hear what happened. I wore all the jewelry, necklace with his name, anchors was my thing for him. So, and I still wear a lot of anchor stuff and have a lot of anchor stuff today.
Can you tell people where the anchors came from?
We started, his nursery was nautical. Okay, so anchors were a part of the nursery, a part of just his identity. And after he passed, I'd been given a lot of gifts, but after he passed, those gifts became like everything to me because they were his. And I left everything in his nursery as is. And then it was a while after he passed that someone said to me, that there's a Bible verse about anchors, and it is Hebrews 6:19. We have this hope as an anchor for the soul, firm and secure. And it was astonishing to me that resonated with me. Obviously the verse itself, but also just that is our symbol for him. Right. And my kids, Sloan, her way to include him was to draw an anchor on things, and which I just loved. Yes. And so we had this way of including him. Maybe she didn't feel comfortable at school talking about him, but she would include an anchor. Yeah. And so I would know, that she thought of him in that moment. And so that was just one of those natural things that just happened because we had all these things. Right. His baby shower was the night he died. It was the night we had his baby shower and I went to sleep and he died that night. So like I said, we had a lot of gifts and a lot of, things in his nursery. And so once Kellen was born, we kept the nursery and added some things like memorial type things, but it was still nautical and it was still anchors and all that. So we've just adapted that as our like family symbol kind of thing. And so that's a way to include him that we don't have to, broadcast. Right. But like I said, I had to wear all the things. I had to have people ask me, what is this? And what is that? And Paige told me one time that I needed people to hear about my loss in order for me to process it almost. Right. And that made a lot of sense to me. I ran into a man at the garden center at Lowe's one time, and he was, older, grandfather type. And he told us completely at random that his grandson had died of a drug overdose. And when, he just really seemed out of it and he was just obviously grieving. And of course we know how that is. And so we listened to him. And then when he left, I thought, I know what he's doing. Yeah. I know what he has to tell people in order to believe it himself that this has happened. Right. And I will never forget that because I saw that in somebody else, and it was like, okay, well, Paige was right again.
And that's such the beauty in grievers finding each other because, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, sometimes, after 4 or 5 times somebody's heard, they're kind of tired of hearing our story. But we have to tell the story hundreds of times so that our brain and heart get on the same page of like, this really happened. Yeah.
I saw someone posted a snippet of a speech from a Compassionate Friends convention, and the founder of that group had a child loss, and rainbows was her symbol. And so she said, I had rainbow toilet seat covers, I had rainbow everything, and she would always see a rainbow near or around his birthday. And one year, the rainbow did not happen. And she was furious. Like, how could this? Every year I get a rainbow, and I didn't get a rainbow this year. And she took her rainbow necklace off, and then she realized, oh, this is going to choke me up. She didn't need that rainbow anymore to validate that her son, and
lived and mattered.
Yes, lived and mattered.
Yes.
And so I didn't realize one day why I stopped wearing the necklace I had to wear every day. But it's because I didn't feel I didn't have to broadcast it in order to be in a good place, or to feel okay. Now it's more of like, if I care enough about you, you get to know.
Yes.
And before it was like, I'm going to tell you whether you want to know or not.
Right.
And so, and at first that was hard to accept. Like, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing the same thing, but it's just an evolution.
Right. And I love that you used that word a few minutes ago because that's what grief is, and I think that feels good to people when they think about it. We don't love all that intensity of grief in the beginning. It's overwhelming. It's scary. I'm going to be like this forever. Like, can't remember anything and a walking, crying mess. But then when you sort of start to feel a little bit better, that feels scary too, because it feels like I'm forgetting or I'm moving on. But really, grief is this evolution. And to go back to what we said earlier, it's an evolution, but it's always a part of your DNA.
Absolutely.
It's who you are with you always.
I think at first there was not a second, even though I was processing and I was doing other things and going about my daily life, it was right here on the front of my brain. So underlying every little thing I did, shopping at the grocery store was right here. And then there was not a minute that went by. And then there was not an hour that went by. And then there was not a day that went by. And I will say that still 12 years later, there's not a day that goes by that I don't think something. I'll see a cloud or, something triggers a thought to haze. And I love that. I want that to always be the case. But I'm okay with that now.
Right.
And that was not always okay,
Sure, absolutely. So along those lines, what would you say to a brand new, freshly grieving couple? What do you think they need to hear from you to know right now?
The most important thing I did was to express myself and grieve out loud and not care what other people thought. And now, maybe not everybody has to grieve out loud, but I felt like people needed to know because of the type of loss, because the community, I wouldn't say the community, there were plenty of people who were so kind and so empathetic and still are to this day. But there were a lot that weren't. And I think my type of loss made people uncomfortable. And so it was important for me to grieve out loud. And that may not be the case in every situation, but that was important for me. And then making the connections I made was invaluable to know that, okay, well, I don't have any people in my day-to-day life that have gone through this and shared with me how they feel, but I have these other people. And even though I don't see them every day, we're in contact every day. And to this day, we've met in person. Some of us multiple times. We met as a group twice. And I'm talking like 17 people. Right. And it's crazy. But
from all over the country, right?
From all over the country. Canada. We have Canadian friends. Yeah. And it is wild. It is. And we all marvel. We don't just sit around and talk about grief.
Right.
And we're all very, very different. We probably would have never been friends in real life. But we have this connection that that brought us together. And we don't want to let go of that because we can openly and easily talk about our loss as it comes up all these years later. And other people don't understand that. Right. So making connections was extremely important. And then grief counseling. Grief counseling was huge for me because, again, I wouldn't have had the courage to start my version of journaling or to stick up for myself and to really stick to what I felt like I needed if I did not have that encouragement from a professional.
Right.
So that was really important to me.
So we're going to talk to a couple other groups directly here too. Talk to some dads right now. What do they need to know?
Dads are a tough one with this type of loss because they didn't have that connection that we had. Sure, they were excited. Sure, they were happy. And sure, they feel it. They feel it differently. And they also feel helpless, I think, because their partner is suffering in a different way.
Yes.
And they can't fully understand that.
Right.
And that is tough. And I feel like I'm really lucky, like I said, that Jason and I we did not go through, I mean, we definitely hit speed bumps and it was not smooth sailing at all, but, we did not have, we were not in a bad place overall. And that is, it's surprising to me, honestly, but I'm thankful. I'm just super thankful.
Absolutely.
So I just think that respecting, and this doesn't even just go for dads, this goes for all family members, respect each individual and how they need to grieve and just let them go through the process.
So that was the next group I was going to speak to, was the extended family. And I've been talking to just some families within the last week. and really just having to say on repeat, you cannot do this for them. I know you want to make it better, you want to make it go away, but you cannot do this for them. They have to do this. This is an individual walk. And that's been really hard for some of these families to absorb. So what do the extended family members need to hear?
Number one, that the loss is a real loss.
Yes.
It's a real loss. It's a real grief. I had someone tell me who lost 2 children, and I never even knew the circumstances. It was someone at my OBGYN's office. And she just said, I have 2 children in heaven. And I just said, oh my gosh, that's so much worse. And she said, no, it's not worse. It's different. So your grief is the same as mine, but my grief is just a different circumstances.
Yeah.
And I will also never forget that, because it's so true. And I was even at the time saying, oh, my grief is not as valid as yours. But it was. Yeah. And she recognized, and she had been through a lot of counseling herself, she recognized that. And that's important. And for family, they just want their loved one to get better. And they just want they want to fix it. And there's nothing that's going to fix it except time and processing, whether that be through counseling or blocking or whatever. You have to process it, and that comes with time.
Right.
It's not that time heals all wounds. Time lets you understand it, you know, and get to a place with it where you can go on about your life. So that's...
My niece asked me this week about a TikTok video that she was watching about emotional pain that doesn't get expressed. And, she was saying, the video said it just, it will find a way out. And I said, well, yeah, think about it. It's pain. And if it's inside of you and you don't express it, where did it go? It didn't go anywhere. It's still there. It will find a way out. And maybe it's through a physical diagnosis, illness, or, total personality changes, but it's going to come out. And
I'm so glad you said that, because I fully agree with that. And I watched something, one of those shows on TLC about, I think this one was like a Hoarders episode, and the person, when they were drilling down to when did this start and what caused this? And she said, I had a stillborn baby.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to let anything go after that. So she went on about her life, and she had more children, but she never dealt with her loss, and it manifested into this literal mess.
Yes.
And that resonated with me because I thought, yes, if you don't spend the time and do the work and get through this and try to go around it, there is no around it.
Right.
There is only through it. And I'm so thankful that at 6 weeks, and it's because I knew about the program already, that I sought help early, because I realized I couldn't do it by myself. And I literally was not strong enough. And
so I have to jump in there, because it's not that you weren't strong enough. It's that you were grieving and you needed a place for it. And I actually think strength is asking for help.
That's true. Yeah. You're right. You're very right about that. And you're right.
Yeah.
I did. I recognized that I
very
needed
strong
help.
I hear that when you were talking just about, like, I have a daughter and I've got to do this for me. I've got to do this for my marriage. I've got to do that for her. That's so much strength, Molly.
Thank you for pointing that out. You're right. Yeah. I'm not going to discount.
Yes.
I was strong. You're right.
Yes. But you're right. Sometimes we will hear from moms, 6-7 months later, and it's because back to, again, the disenfranchised grief. It's a grief that's not seen as, socially acceptable or whatever. And so they thought, well, I just have to do this myself. I have to be strong. I have to just push through. And then all of a sudden, like, I can't, and it's because part of you is missing, which is grief, Right. And this has been taken from you. You didn't ask for this. And, how do I even begin to cope?
Right.
Yeah. So other moms have asked me, especially they knew we were having this conversation, is how would you explain the grief from a stillbirth to people who just don't have a clue? I think that's a couple of things that some moms I know right now are really struggling with.
Oh, gosh. Other than to say that, it's like I said before, it's the same. Grief is the same. The circumstances are different.
Right.
And, there were so many, yes, you did not get to know your baby outside of the womb, but you knew your baby. And that's all I can think of to say. It's just that the circumstances are different in other types of losses, but the grief is the same.
So something you said earlier that I think goes along with this is you really had to find your voice, even with family and friends, to be heard. You had to have, you found courage to do that. That had to be simply exhausting to, be validating your own grief.
Yes.
To people who love you.
Yes. Yeah. It was awful. It was awful. I think pretty much everyone has come around. They didn't know how to process it either. So I'm not placing blame. Right. I think they handled it poorly, but I don't think they knew how to handle it. Like I said, we've just not had a lot of loss in my family.
Right.
And that's a huge blessing. But at the same time, when you have a loss like this and you have no experience with how to handle grief at all, it's just hard. And I think everybody went through it because everybody was excited and everybody was, anticipating this wonderful thing. And then it was taken away. But of course, I'm feeling it more personally than anyone else. And, I tried some things, like I went to, with a family member, to the Home for the Holidays thing, little, what would you call that?
The grief workshop?
Yes, workshop. That's the word I was looking for. And, we were in there with other people that are grieving with different types of losses. And I knew that was okay because I had been to adult camp Good Grief and with all other people, and we're sharing the same thoughts and feelings. Our grief is the same. Our circumstances are different. But the family member did not understand that. And so it was like, yes, but they had these memories. And so they were able to use these tools, and we don't have that. So how are we supposed to include him in the holidays? And, he's included in our holidays. I bought ornaments for my tree that were either sailboats or anchors or whatever. And now my baby lost mom group, we have an ornament exchange every year. And because it got to a point where you're like, okay, you've bought all these ornaments for yourself.
Right.
But other people, the way other people see you and your grief,
right.
It's just like really neat so it's like a Secret Santa kind of thing.
I love that.
And you get an ornament that someone else thought of to get for your son. And that is a cool,
I love that.
That is a cool thing. But anyway, so there's plenty of ways to do that, but it's hard for somebody who doesn't understand to get that.
Right.
So that was tough.
Yeah. What are you doing now? I think you've got some projects going on, or how are you continuing to cope and live with your grief?
I feel like I'm in such a good place that I wouldn't say I'm necessarily doing anything these days other than living with my grief. Yeah. And I think that is a huge thing in itself.
Absolutely.
Because I'll think all the time, I never, first month, forget about it. I never thought I'd be here. First year, I never thought I'd be in this place.
Right.
I think at 5 years, it took a turn for the better. Not that it didn't get better along the way, but at 5 years, it was like just a different level of understanding. And then we went through, a little progress each year. And then at 10 years, I felt like I feel now.
Yeah.
And that is just, if I'd looked back and thought it's going to be 10 years until I feel this way, that's a lot to process.
Right.
But at the same time, I feel like a little bit, just baby steps. And then all of a sudden you're here. So this is, I've got a book here that I'm sharing with Angela. This is my friend Brooke's book.
Okay.
She is one of my initial baby loss connections.
Okay.
And her blog, she is a writer by trade. Her blog just gave all the answers. And it was just her speaking. Just the way she writes, everybody resonated with her blog. And she kept her blog going longer than I think anybody. She still blogs every now and then. But it's a tribute to her daughter. You can go back and read from the beginning. And she was blogging from the very beginning.
Okay.
Because she was already blogging before.
Okay.
And so she turned her regular blog into this grief blog. And it's cool to see, I don't know if that's the right word.
Right.
To see it documented from the beginning.
Right.
And because mine didn't start, I think I started blogging 6 months later. And so I don't really remember a whole lot of that beginning part. Yeah. But her blog is bythebrook.blogspot.com. I may need to confirm that. And she wrote a book. And it is about baby loss. It is about the connection we all made and how we got through it.
Oh, wow.
And she self-published it. And it's brilliant. So I'm going to leave this with you.
Tell us the title.
It's called Unimaginable: Life After Baby Loss by Brooke D. Taylor.
Okay.
And I'm not going to take credit by saying we helped her with this, but she did talk through a lot of things as she was writing this. And my friend Caroline came up with the baby duck on the cover. And because that's what her symbol was ducks. And so Brooke is an incredible writer. Her blog helped me and so many others. And now she's got this book. And it's such a tribute to her daughter, a tribute to her as a writer, and just so helpful.
I'm glad you shared that. You know, we kind of, for our logo, for lack of a better words, grief is real, grief is big, grief is better shared. And grief is so much better shared. And that is a perfect example, and your whole story of how you found the place to share your grief.
Yes.
You know, to share the heaviness, to find other like-minded people, even though circumstances were different, but people you could be real with your grief. And so, you know, we're big believers that not everyone needs grief counseling.
Right.
They don't. But everyone needs grief support.
Yes.
Everyone needs grief shared.
Yes.
And so that sounds like a perfect example for parents and families to see that grief shared and to know that you're not alone.
Yes.
That's just so critical. So thank you for sharing that.
And this is a great way for someone to share with a family member.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so read what this girl went through. Read how real this was.
Right.
Because, and her words, I don't know how she does it. They just resonate with people. And I remember one time on her blog, I'll have to look it up and send it to you because it is so good. Public service announcement for grief.
Yes.
And we were all like, oh my gosh, this is like, I
Yes.
shared it on my blog.
Yes.
It was just like the best.
Yes.
I want everyone to read
Yes.
this.
Yes.
It was that moment. And so it's just, I could not recommend this more for not only a mom, and for some moms right out of the gate, this may be too much.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah, dosing. I was a big believer we have to dose ourselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
But some people may need to read this to see how you come through it early. Everybody's different in how they handle it. But it would be great for a family member who maybe their person has not opened up on a blog or doesn't know how to talk about it. It maybe help them handle that person's grief.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Talk about your self-identity. You know, who Molly is, and because grief impacts self-identity.
Yes.
And you've talked a little bit about that as we've talked, but I didn't really point out that it was your identity we were talking about.
Well, I feel like, number one, I identify as a mom. Initially, I had to tell everyone that I had 2 kids or that I had 2 babies. And we've talked about that a little bit. And Paige gave me another example. Again, I won't forget. I wonder if she's going to think, boy, she really listened to a lot of things I said.
It makes us feel good as therapists to know that our clients listen.
But I said, when I say this and they'll say, I have two, and they see one, she said, you see someone on an airplane, and if it makes you feel better to say, I have two at home, you don't have to say at home. They're not at home. I have two. Or you can just leave that part out. You don't have to go into all the details. But you got to, if it's going to help you talk to the random guy on the airplane that you're never going to see again, you don't have to explain the whole thing. But it does help me. At the time, it helped me to say I had two. Well, now I struggle with that differently, because I have four in my heart, but I don't have 4 kids. I had 4 babies. And I never had Hayes as a kid. And so that is tough because, so on my Instagram, right under my name, I've got a pink heart and then 3 blue hearts. It's like he's absolutely a part of that, and at the same time not. So I identify as a mom of 4 babies, 1 in heaven and 3 here with me. And that, I feel good about that now. I didn't always feel good about that. It was definitely a rocky place to get here, but that's how I identify now. And I'm good. And
I like that you explain that, because that goes back to what we were talking about, the evolution. That whatever you are saying in the first days and weeks and months, it can change. It doesn't have to be the same thing you say 3 years later, 10 years later. That's another way our grief evolves. One easy way we talk about that is whatever you do the first holiday doesn't have to be what you're going to do for every holiday. So I think we have to remember that about our language too, that I can say something now and that can evolve. It can change.
Very much so. And that's a good point about the holidays. So the birthday thing, I think I brought up, but we have this tradition of going to his, and we're so thankful to have this tree at our church as just a memorial spot. And he is buried at a cemetery, but that wasn't the happy spot. I would definitely go there, and I took the kids there a lot, but at the same time, I went there to grieve. And this tree was different, and it just had a different feel to it. So we have this memorial tree at our church. It has a plaque with his name, it has a bench, and it's just a nice place to go. So we started doing that on his birthday. And like I said, it has evolved. I had very small children when we started it, and we would take a table out there, and it was just Sloan and my parents and Jason, and we would have this huge picnic and a whole thing. And at that point, I was literally putting the food in my mouth, choking it down. I didn't want to be there eating. I didn't want to be there trying to celebrate. And then as the kids got older and they got into school, it evolved into like a dessert picnic. And some years it was, we're grabbing something on the way up there, but this is what we're doing. And the 5th year, I was in the hospital. We didn't talk about this yet. I was in the hospital on bed rest with my 3rd living child now. And that was a very difficult pregnancy, and literally a 50-50 with him. Not only did I have placenta previa again, I had vasa previa, I had placenta percreta. It was very life-threatening to me and to Taylor, and we came through that miraculously. But Jason was at home with the other 2 for 10 weeks while I was in the hospital, and his birthday fell during that time. And I'm like, you get some cupcakes and you take those kids up to that tree, because I couldn't go. And my baby loss mom friends, they knew they had to do something for me that day, because I was so upset to not be able to go to his tree. And so they all took these pictures with their rainbow babies, and spelled out happy birthday Hayes, each one having a letter in their pictures. And I woke up to it that morning and it meant so much. So, Jason, looking back, I'm like, it's not funny, but it's just like I was so hell-bent on you take those cupcakes when those kids up there. And he was like, it was a disaster. It did not go how you wanted it to go. But I'm like, okay, you did it.
Right.
It just meant
success
to me. Yes, success, whatever. So it's looked differently over the years. And that's going to continue to happen. I do wonder, how will that look differently when I have teenagers? Are they still going to want to do this? And maybe I'll just go. Maybe I'll just go up there and garden for the day or whatever. But who knows?
It will evolve.
It will evolve, yes.
Yeah.
So, yes, things evolve, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And holidays have evolved, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And like my Christmas card has evolved. It was much more focused on my grief in the beginning, and now it's inclusive.
Right.
But it's not focused.
Right.
We post a picture of our family, and we sign it with Hayes in our hearts.
Yeah.
And that's what feels right to me right now. And again, on the Christmas card thing, I think one year I literally said to Jason, thank you for not, because I don't think it's as important to him, but thank you for letting me include this.
Yes.
And I think that probably there are people that he knows that think it's weird, but he's okay with that, you know?
Yeah. Good.
So.
Support.
Yes. Support.
Important. Yes. You mentioned rainbow baby.
Yes.
Let's talk about what rainbow babies. What is that?
Rainbow babies. Well, it is the rainbow after a storm. It is the light in your life after going through something terrible. Rainbow babies, it sounds like it's a cure.
Yeah.
It's no cure.
No.
And that you don't want it to be a cure.
Right.
Kellen's birth brought joy back to our home. Not that we didn't already experience joy with Sloan, but we needed a new joy, And of course, we wanted another baby. We wanted to grow our family. And there's nothing wrong with that because we did, but it would never, I was just almost apprehensive because I didn't want people to think we were replacing Hayes.
Right.
And it was so hard, really, to make people understand that, yes, this has helped us, but this did not fix things. Like I said before, it was very hard emotionally in the beginning for me to have a new baby, and I was still very deep in the grieving process. And even though it had been a full year, when I got pregnant, and then here I've got, 8 months, he was delivered a little early. And so 20 months when he was born, so 20 months out, and I'm still experiencing like the depths of grief. Right. And I was not expecting that. I knew it wasn't going to fix things, but I think I would feel a massive relief after I had him. And it just was not. It was in a sense, like thankfully I have a son. I have a living baby that I'm going to be able to raise, hopefully. But it just was not that extreme relief that I wouldn't even say I was hoping for it, but that people expect, that people hope for it. I did go on to have a fourth baby, Taylor. And I will say that after that 5-year mark is when Taylor was born. And, August is my birthday and Hayes' birthday. And his funeral was actually on my birthday. So I did not want another August baby. Yeah. And I told my doctor, here we are in this like very precarious situation. It's like each day that we go, even though I'm on hospital bed rest, if I start to bleed, that is the baby's bleeding because of the vasoprevia. And we may not get to him in time, even though I am already in the hospital. Right. And so it was a very planned out birth. And the surgery was 8 hours. I had to that they took the baby out first, and then they had to go in, and I had to have a hysterectomy in order to get my my uterus had to come out in order to get the placenta out and save my life. And my bladder had to be repaired because the placenta had grown through my uterine wall into my bladder. So it was a very, very scary situation.
Yes.
So when I came out of that and we had just crossed the 5-year mark in the hospital, Taylor was born on August 31st.
Yes.
Even though I said, I cannot have
Right.
a August baby. And here he comes August 31st.
Yeah.
I thought that was just the universe laughing at my plan.
Right. Right.
But it has become, a joyful thing in that month. And speaking of evolution, I never thought I'd celebrate my birthday.
Yeah.
In the beginning, it was this happened on August 15th, or he was born on August 15th, and my birthday was the 18th, and his funeral was on my birthday, and I will never celebrate my birthday again.
Yeah.
And slowly, and I will say it was the encouragement of friends who wouldn't take no for an answer.
Yeah.
To say, we are going to celebrate you. You can still be sad today, but we are going to celebrate you. And they just, at some point, they made it to where it's okay.
Yeah.
And that is the support that we talked about is so necessary. And I celebrate my birthday now, and I don't feel guilty about that. Whereas in the beginning, I never would have thought.
Right.
I will never celebrate my birthday again.
Yeah, that speaks to those messages we give ourselves in the beginning. And that's, I think, comes out of a place of fear and survival and protest, But when we do the work, we evolve.
Yes, we evolve.
Yeah.
And we end up in a better spot than we ever thought.
But
possible.
it takes a lot of work.
It takes a lot of work.
Yeah,
and it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
And I think the time part, people want to say time heals all. I think it's more, as long as you're doing work during that time,
Exactly.
the work takes
Right,
time.
right.
And then once you've done the work,
Yeah.
you're in that place, So you have this time to do work. You can either do the work or you can waste the time.
That's right.
And thankfully, like I said, I hit the ground running at 6 weeks and
Right.
started my work.
Right.
And then, it still took a long time to get to where I am now.
Because if you don't do the work, it goes back to what my niece was asking me about. You still have this pain inside of you
Yes.
that had nowhere to go. So it's been on its own journey of finding a destructive way out.
A destructive way out. And then you still have to deal with
and
it.
you still have to deal with it.
And then you
Right.
maybe have to deal with that destructive behavior as well.
Exactly.
And so it just compounds itself.
Yeah.
And that is, is so sad because it's a hard enough situation. That situation's not going away.
Right.
You've just got to face it.
Right.
And you've got to ask for help and you've got to find support.
Yeah.
And then that is work.
Right.
And then you get to a place eventually where you're like, okay, time didn't heal, but time and work,
Right.
the time I took doing the work helped.
Yes.
And here we are. Yeah. And we came through it.
Yeah.
And couldn't be more thankful. So
It sounds like a perfect place to end there of the asking for help, doing the work, the acknowledgement of the work that it takes. The work is hard. That's why we believe in dosing it. It's okay to take a break from it. But, having known you as long as I have and worked with you and just thinking about Hayes 12 years later, I'm so thrilled to see that Hayes is still a part of the conversation and your family, and you're sharing him here today, helping other families. And I really do believe that. I believe you just even saying his name gives other families hope and encouragement to do their work.
thank you for saying that. And that is something that I said from the beginning. I did not want his name. I wanted his name to be spoken in my house.
Yeah.
I did not want that to ever be something that makes anybody uncomfortable. And so we just tried our best to just keep that as part of the daily dialogue. And it doesn't have to be part of the daily dialogue to this day.
Right.
But it's a part of our family.
Part of your family.
So.
Yep. And this is not a lie at all. Whenever I see an anchor, I think of Hayes.
Oh, wow.
I'm not kidding.
That is so sweet.
That is very true.
Thank you for sharing that.
And in your pictures, when I see it, I'll see that, and I smile for your family.
Thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And I feel like a lot of people have told me that, and it blows me away every time I hear it. But I have it here on my keychain. It's just a part of, it's just my way of keeping him close. And I don't even really think about it as much anymore. But it's, we have anchors. People see a cool anchor and they, and they either give it to me or send me a picture or what, and it means so much. And it's just,
and we tell our families, we use your anchor as an example sometimes for people, like, it's a linking object. You have to find your linking object.
Yes.
And so I think that's a beautiful part of Hayes' story, and I just appreciate you sharing that.
Thank you for sharing with me. That means so much. I'm so thrilled to hear that. So thank you for asking me today. I'm an open book, and I pretty much have been since the beginning, and I feel like that's just a huge part of my healing.
Grief does heal. Let me say that again. Grief does heal. We talked today about disenfranchised grief too. Disenfranchised grief deserves attention and care, and support and patience. Remember that your grief is a reflection of your love, and you are not alone. The world is full of grievers like you. You can learn more about us at www.baptistgriefcenters.org. You can also check out our YouTube channel, Baptist Centers for Good Grief, for coping skills, toolbox segments to help you with your grief. And remember, grief is real, big, better shared. We'll talk soon.